So this paper deals with how a particular playing body emerges during video game play. And I want to particularly focus on the role of the relationship between the avatar and the player in structuring this, the emergence of this game body, this playing body. And I'm going to look for the purposes of illustration at the EA game Fight Night Round 3, the boxing game. Obviously, action games and avatars come in different shapes and sizes and forms. A lot of what I'm going to say might be specific to this game or this type of game, but hopefully a lot of it will be generalizable as well. The playing body is understood here as the Merleau-Pontian phenomenal body as it exists during video game play. So this phenomenal body is defined by Merleau-Ponty as a kind of ephemeral protean body that reaches into the world through perception and manipulation of things in the world. And I want to think about the structure of this playing body in terms of the avatar as a tool that we use to relate to and manipulate other game objects, but also as a game object itself that it displays itself often in quite spectacular ways, and that is a kind of an object of perception in that sense. And it's an object of perception with particular aesthetic and cultural resonances. The avatar has frequently been seen as double in this way. So Byrne and Schott talk about the avatar as, on the one hand, a digital dummy, and on the other, a heavy hero. And they're talking about Final Fantasy VII, I think. So the digital dummy is kind of a puppet for playing, whereas the heavy hero is a kind of a fictional character. Here, I want to think of this doubleness in terms of Heidegger's distinction between the tool as potentially present at hand when we look upon it theoretically, and ready to hand where we use it in order to accomplish some kind of project where we manipulate it. The avatar's place within the structure of the playing body is different as it presents itself in these different modes. And this has been pointed out by Gregerson and Grodal in the difference between, in terms of the game world more generally. So they talk about two separate systems for how the player interacts with the game world. On the one hand, you've got empathy caused by a response of mirror neurons in the player in relation to game information provided audiovisually, which recreates the conditions of the virtual world in the body. And at the same time, tool use, which activates the somatosensory and proprioceptive systems, extending the player's body into the virtual world. And tool use here is understood in terms of the controller, but I want to think of the avatar in terms of tool use. So to summarize that, I want to think of the avatar as present to hand in the way it becomes part of the playing body through empathy, and the avatar as ready to hand, which becomes part of the playing body through a kind of a prosthetic incorporation. But neither of these two processes is stable or fixed, and it's possible to think about how the design of a game might influence the structure of this playing body. This is a quote from the game designer Warren Robinett, talking about one of his games. He says, when players say, "I ran into a wall," they mean the shape they moved ran into a wall. They are that shape. And it doesn't really seem to describe what the experience of interacting with an avatar actually feels like. I never really feel like I am that certainly not that shape, but not even that boxer that I'm using to control. There's never that direct identification. But I think what Robinett is identifying is more than just a linguistic contraction. There is some kind of identification or incorporation going on between the player and the avatar, even when it's just a simple shape. If we use Merleau-Ponty's understanding of the tool as a means of perception, the example he gives is the blind person with a cane. Perhaps a parallel to Robinett's example here is if we heard a blind person say that they noticed a curve or they noticed a corner. Should we correct that to my cane noticed a corner? There's obviously a kind of a contraction going on in terms of who's doing the noticing or eliding the tool from that process. So to incorporate the tool into the body, maybe more than just a trick of speech, it demonstrates a real incorporation of the instrument into the phenomenal body, which Drew Leader has described as phenomenological osmosis. And perhaps this idea can be used to unpick the influential definition of presence by Lombard and Ditton as the illusion of non-mediation. What they're describing in this idea of the illusion of non-mediation is that the interface or whatever mediating device is allowing us to be in this mediated space disappears in the moment of presence. But perhaps it would be better to say not that it disappears, but it becomes incorporated within this phenomenal body, because then you're not doing away with the interface. It's still there and it can still be thought about, but it is not there in the same, it's there as a kind of a ready-to-hand, it withdraws in the way that a ready-to-hand tool does. And so it could perhaps move from an idea of transportation into a virtual space and towards an idea of transformation of the body in its encounter with a particular project, a particular game, or a particular virtual machine. However, the incorporation of the tool into the body isn't guaranteed, and it's not stable, and it's rarely long-term. Even in cases in which we might expect an incorporation to occur, it doesn't always. So Craig Murray and Judith Sixsmith have talked about people who have prosthetic limbs, some of whom will come to consider the prosthesis as part of their body, but many of whom don't, even after many years of use. And when it does happen that people begin to consider their prosthesis as a part of their body, it only really happens after very prolonged use, is what they have found. So I would argue that the avatar as a means of action in the game environment often works towards the achievement of this kind of incorporation, even if it's only ever fleetingly accomplished. On the other hand, you've got this idea of empathy. So the avatar is also an object of perception, and it's often one of the main focuses of the player's gaze, but not always, but sometimes it is. And it's often a very spectacular kind of an object. It asserts itself as an image, often at the times when gameplay demands are at their least. So perhaps in cutscenes, I mean, we could argue that in a cutscene, it's not an avatar that we're looking at, but that's perhaps another question. But at times when we're not, the demands on the player to use the avatar as tool is not as strong. Much performance theory that has focused on the relationship between a performer and an audience has hinged on a question: what is it about watching a performer that's pleasurable to an audience? And very often empathy is used as a way of thinking about this. The term empathy was first used by the late 19th century German aesthetician Robert Vischer to understand not fellow feeling, which came to be the the predominant understanding of the term in the 20th century, but the way in which someone who's appreciating a work of art merges with that work of art. And he was particularly looking at sculpture. And the idea wasn't that you identify with the sculpture because it looks like a human being and has a character, therefore. But even with an abstract, with a vase, for example, it has a physical form like I do. And so when I see the vase, I can have an empathic kind of relationship to it because I know what it is to have a physical form. And I can imagine what it is to have that form. So in this work, we can have an empathic response to it. On the one hand, we have an empathic response not just because these are people we're looking at, but because the form is something that we can relate to. So there are very strong lines and curves. So we're not just responding to these boxers, as people, but also as form. And this is an idea that was developed by, or similar to an idea that was developed by John Martin, the dance critic in the 1930s, in an effort to explain how to appreciate modern dance. So modern dance was something that didn't have a meaning in the way that dance prior to that had. So you needed a way in. And his way in was to say, well, don't try to think of what the story of this dance is. Try to empathize with the movement as a movement that you could be also engaged in. So his idea was that a dance watched is twice performed. It's performed on the stage, but also within the body of the audience member who's attending to it. But these are also human beings, and they have cultural resonances. And this is reinforced when we know the title of the picture by George Bellows is Both Members of This Club, and it was painted in 1909. So with this caption, and even without it, the figures take on political and racial overtones. They have this cultural belonging that is a part of our appreciation of the picture. So we empathize with them as human beings. And in fact, when we see human forms, we always have that kind of cultural baggage belonging to them. They're always gendered in some way, or sexual, or belonging to some ethnicity. And our ideas of those belongings kind of bring to bear on the way we empathize with the figures in the painting. So when we encounter the avatar theoretically or contemplatingly, we do so in two ways. First, as a thing with a physical form, and second, as a culturally constituted human being. So this is just an oversimplified kind of summary of where I'm at so far. But this isn't intended as a strict division between the way that we can encounter the avatar. I would say that during gameplay, perhaps there's a flicker between these different ways of engaging with the avatar, but maybe more likely there's a tension between them where all of these are going on at once. One perhaps in the ascendancy at one point, another at another point, but all coming together in the emergence of this playing body. So I want to apply this to the game Fight Night Round 3. So the boxer as a tool, as potentially prosthetic incorporation. So this is a really important, was a really important thing to emphasize, particularly for game scholars in the early days of the establishment of game studies. This refocusing of the avatar away from an image to be contemplated and towards something that is for gameplay. So James Newman in 2002, I'll quote him directly, defined the avatar as a set of potentials, available techniques, opportunities, and capabilities which can be embodied expanding the abilities of the player and equipping them for the task at hand. So the avatar is something in order to. And Espen Arset's famous phrase about Lara Croft, that we don't see the dimensions of Lara Croft don't matter, we see through her and past her when we're playing. And this idea of seeing through and past, this idea of invisibility of the avatar, is something that's maybe a little troubling as well, because we don't see through and past Lara, do we? Even as we're using her, we're looking at her. She doesn't become invisible. So I'll look at the form in which the avatar might become an image a little bit later on. And the other thing I want to mention with this slide is on the left we have the different controls that are associated with the different punches in the game. And I don't want to dwell too much on the controls, which is another aspect, but I just want to mention them because Heidegger talks of equipment not existing in the singular, but as part of more equipment, of a larger equipment. So the controller, the avatar, and perhaps even the opponent can be thought of as part of this equipment because we are manipulating the opponent based on the moves that we make, if the opponent is computer controlled. So in terms of empathy, first of all, the boxer as form. The first thing here is a training game. And in the training game pictured here, as we're looking at it now, what we see is a specimen of masculine athleticism and of beauty. But in the game, that's not really the form that we're engaged with. In this game, he's lifting weights, so when it reaches the red part, you've got to push down on each stick. So it's a bit of a kind of a tricky bit of gameplay. And our focus isn't really on this torso and the head. It's on the line traced by the hands. And it's this line where all of our response is kind of located. So it's this line that we're empathizing with. It's the figure that line traces, rather than the body of the avatar as a man that we're kind of have an empathic relationship to. And the lower one is, so we saw before, it's kind of, generally the gameplay is in a two-shot, but if you land a particular kind of punch, the perspective change, the point of view changes to the first-person view of the person who got hit, so whoever's defending. And again, as a photo, as a screenshot, what occurs to us is this is an image of a boxer. But when playing it, the form of that boxer isn't exactly the same. What we're looking at is the angles of the punches and the lines traced by potential punches. We're anticipating potential punches. So that's the form that we're concentrating on. And even throughout the game, the form that we're concentrating on is more like a set of hitboxes. But particularly, maybe not so much in this game, but if we think of a game like Street Fighter 2. So the hitboxes are the areas of the screen for which your avatar is vulnerable. And if contact is made by the other opponent in that hitbox, then you sustain damage. So what you're looking out for, especially as you get better at the game, isn't your avatar as a body kind of bordered by its flesh, its skin, but the indication that body has in terms of hitboxes extending out slightly before it. So the boxer as character, we're choosing boxers, we're choosing people like Muhammad Ali or George Foreman. They have ideas associated with them that we bring into the game. Also, cutscenes, commentary, ring announcement, all tries to imbue the boxer with the idea that it's a character. So far, I've separated the avatar as ready to hand and present at hand, or as a tool and as an image. But bringing those together, you could ask, what about the avatar being a tool that we manipulate to get work done influences our empathic response to the avatar as either a form or as a character. And I would say that it undermines that, at least in this game and potentially in others. It undermines our potential for an empathic response. So in terms of physical form, if we look at the work of Ivar Hagendorn, who's a choreographer and a researcher, he talks about empathy being sustained or being supported by the fact that in the audience we are looking at the dancer dancing and imagining the line finishing, making kind of hypotheses about how the line will extend, and then either being correct or incorrect about that. Now, it seems when you're playing a boxing game, or a game when you're controlling the avatar, perhaps that's not quite the same. You kind of know, you at least know how you want the line to continue. You may fail, so perhaps there's some of that. In terms of the avatar as a human being, it's very difficult to respect the avatar. The avatar is a moron. The avatar just does what you want it to do. And if you don't do anything, it just stands there in the ring getting pulverized. So there's no real, and it perhaps undermines respect for the avatar. That undermining of respect may make an empathic relationship between the avatar as as a representation of a human being difficult. The avatar is, in the Heideggerian sense, in the conventional sense, but also in the contemporary kind of derogatory sense, a tool. So I'll leave that there and open it up for questions.
Thank you. Thank you for the talk. My question is, it seems like you're actually making the case that if you want to have characters, if you're designing a game and you want to have characters which players should empathize with, you should focus on non-player characters and not the avatar.
Yeah, perhaps. The other thing about creating interesting characters is using cutscenes. So it's not necessarily that first of all, it may not be an issue. It may not be an important thing. If you do want to, then perhaps cutscenes are a way to go. But I'm not actually very confident on that point because everyone loves Gordon Freeman. So, you know, maybe that's not the case. But certainly in this game, there's something moronic about the boxer. But I was thinking about this, and the reason that I respect Sonic is because when I stop moving, he turns to me and taps his foot. So he's kind of doing something that is coming from him and not from me. So perhaps non-player characters could potentially be more characterful than the avatar that you're controlling. Or it could be achieved in different ways.
Thank you very much. If never had existed the cultural instance of boxing, how would we incorporate the boxer? As I think the player recognized that that situation is culturally, so that she understands what she has to do.
Sorry, could you repeat the
So
start of the
the question is, if we never had existed the cultural instance of boxing, how would we incorporate the boxer?
If we didn't know
Yeah,
what boxing was.
That's it.
Well, it's not just boxing that is important that is making the avatar a cultural thing. It's also the race of the boxer. It's also the height, the strength. It's a sexually attractive image. So all of those are we're still empathizing with, even if we know nothing about boxing. So selecting Muhammad Ali for a boxing fan means something. Selecting Muhammad Ali for someone who's never seen Muhammad Ali before still means something in terms of his attractiveness, his power, his strength, which are all culturally loaded ideas. So it's not just that it's a boxing game, though we are informed in our response to the avatar in terms of how much we know about boxing.